Hello and welcome to Tuesday in Parliament, our look at the best of the day in the Commons and the Lords. On this programme, condemnation of a move by African countries to suspend a United Nations gay rights watchdog.
Gay men in particular are still being persecuted in Russia and beaten up by the police. Gay men in Iran are still being executed for...
Money experts look at how to help people struggling with their finances.
When you've got a product that most people wouldn't get because it's really expensive, it tends to be vulnerable consumers and people who are less educated or have less options out there who get it.
And the strange story of Sports Direct, the MP's visit, and the sandwiches that were bugged.
Doesn't the Secretary of State agree with me that there is no place for this kind of behaviour in the senior parts of big business in this country?
But first, the attempt of African nations to suspend the appointment of a UN expert to investigate violence against people from the lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender community has come in for strong criticism in the Commons. The UN has been working to improve gay rights around the world, but has run into opposition from countries in Africa and Middle East, as well as from Russia and China. At Westminster, in response to an urgent question from a Labour MP, the Foreign Office Minister, Sir Alan Duncan, said the government believed that no one's sexual orientation should deny them the chance to lead a life of dignity free from violence.
All people are born with equal rights and should enjoy the protection of the United Nations. Acts of violence against LGBT people take place in all regions of the world, including our own. We condemn such violence and discrimination, and we strongly support this new independent expert in his work, and we will resist any and all attempts to block his appointment and his mandate.
Sarah Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Minister for his very upfront sort of declaration of intent that this government is taking on this.
She said the attempt to suspend the independent expert was part of a move to stop the advancement of LGBT human rights.
In many countries, persecution based on who you love, are sexually attracted to, or your gender identity is extreme. Often this discrimination and violence is actually state-sanctioned. According to a UN human rights report last year, at least 76 countries retain laws to criminalise and harass people based on their sexual orientation and gender identity. This includes fines, tortures, hard labour, forced conversion therapy, lifelong prison sentences and the death penalty.
When I was a Foreign Office Minister, Mr. Speaker, I was told by one leader of a Commonwealth country that I wouldn't be welcome to visit that country. So we have come quite a long way, and can I thank him for what he is doing. But is it not time, Mr. Speaker, to make our very generous aid conditional on respect for all humans' rights?
Distressingly, the vote may pass, and so the UK Government, the Foreign Secretary indeed, must be doing everything possible, using every possible channel to stop this loathsome resolution being approved. The Foreign Secretary's diplomacy skills are needed now more than ever.
The continued appointment of this independent expert to translate international principles of human law into practical action and ensure that they are enforced will be immensely important.
And will he accept from me the very best wishes of the LGBT community in the battle that he is now leading within the UN, and say that if this human rights advocate is actually taken away from the UN and suddenly voted against in this way, it will be a huge setback for the fight to make change in the 76 countries in the world that currently criminalise LGBT people.
As someone who was beaten unconscious because of his sexuality some years ago, I know how isolating it can feel when you've been attacked that way. So does he agree with me that for all those people who are being persecuted across the world because of their sexuality, this appointment is incredibly important?
The truth is that gay men in particular are still being persecuted in Russia and beaten up by the police. Gay men in Iran are still being executed for their sexuality. Gay men in so many other countries around the world can be arrested or imprisoned simply for holding hands. So I entirely endorse everything that the ministers said today, but isn't it a particular irony for we British people. That 90% of people who live in Commonwealth countries live in countries where homosexuality is illegal because we, the British, wrote those colonial laws. Yes. Isn't it time that we really took this as a very important part of our campaign for a better world?
So I think many of these laws in the Commonwealth are indeed totally out of date, highly inappropriate, and should be changed.
Meanwhile, in the world of football, are attitudes to gay people likely to change? The Culture Committee is now inquiring into homophobia in sport. Few footballers have ever come out as gay, and certainly none in the Premier League. The former basketball player, John Amachi, who came out in 2007, has been talking to the committee about the problems facing gay sportsmen and women.
The things that are tolerated when it comes to homophobia are not tolerated when it comes to race. And for someone who's both black and gay, that is frustrating and irritating for me, because it is a tacit message from sport that somehow the colour of my skin is worthy of protection, but sexuality is not. Sport is, I mean, if you just take one part of it in football, it's a 3+, maybe £4 billion revenue organisation. It has the resources to do whatever it wants. It has the resources to hire the best culture change people. It should be worth note that the organisations that sponsor sport have moved in a different direction to sport itself. We do not accept in workplaces, most workplaces, the kind of things that go on in sport.
Can you tell people watching this who maybe don't spend much time in the stands what the stands are like? How are people behaving in the stands?
What happens in stands is that a tiny minority of people can say awful things, while good people do nothing, because they fear that if they speak up on this issue, they're in trouble. We have created, this is part of the hierarchy, right? Because when a white person stands up for a black person, we think they're awesome. When a man stands up for a woman, we think he's amazing and eminently dateable. But when a straight person stands up for a gay person, we think they're gay. This environment pervades society and is condensed in the stands, so that even when good people know something terrible is happening around them, if it was racism, they'd be calling the stewards, they'd be vociferously yelling about it. If it was, well, perhaps not sexism, unfortunately, in the stands, and certainly not homophobia, because they fear that they won't be seen as the right kind of man.
Now, what more needs to be done to help people who struggle with their finances? Also, what protections do the most vulnerable need? Just two of the questions a group of peers have been seeking answers to as they look into the problem of financial exclusion. Better education is one way forward, according to a leading expert, and greater awareness of the impact of advertising on those with mental health issues.
The Money and Mental Health Policy Institute have written recently about a predatory retail environment in which the online gambling and shopping industries seem to target especially vulnerable customers. Can you expand on this? And do you think the same can be said of other parts of the financial services sector in their relationship to vulnerable people and those in poor mental health?
I think over the last decade, with people with mental health, what we've seen is much better processes on the curative side. When somebody calls up and says, I've got bad debts, I've got a mental health problem, I think certainly the big institutions are far better with specialised teams at dealing with that than they were a decade ago.
But it was still a big problem.
You're 5 times more likely to be in debt crisis if you've got a mental health problem than if you haven't. That's a horrendous statistic, and we need to prevent that rather than just treat it sympathetically once somebody gets into the position. I certainly think we do have issues at the bottom end of the market, the doorstep lending, the payday loans, and I think once we start getting into that type of lending market, I think it is predatory. And I think by definition, when it's predatory, when you've got a product that most people wouldn't get because it's